Oliver's ex-girlfriend's child has leukemia. That child is critically ill and wants to see him, so he left me alone on a mountain road in the pouring rain. Later, I decided to divorce him, and he impatiently questioned why I would care about a child. He said that the child's condition was improving and wouldn't bother us anymore. I looked at him calmly and said, "Her child is getting better, while my child is gone. My mom has been pressuring me to get married ever since I graduated from college. Whenever she has a moment, she brings it up. It's been a weekly topic for 3 whole years. I couldn't take it anymore and agreed to her plans. That's when I met Oliver during my one and only blind date. I can't describe the shock I felt. He was someone I considered untouchable and the person I had liked for 9 whole years. But I had never dared to let anyone know because he had his princess, Ruby. I will never forget the day after the college entrance examination when Oliver scored first in the entire city. During an interview, a reporter asked if he wanted to thank anyone. He suddenly took Ruby's hand and said, "I want to thank my girlfriend Ruby, and I hope to climb the next mountain with you." I sat next to the TV, watching his confession, unable to utter a word. It was true. Ruby was second in our school and 8th in the city, while I was someone who had to fight tooth and nail just to barely make it into the top 50. I thought they would always be together, but perhaps there were just too many mountains in life, and they drifted apart. When Ruby was a freshman, she was scouted by an agent and debuted. By her junior year, she was incredibly popular, and then she broke up with Oliver. When I learned about this, I didn't feel much. However, many nights, I remembered how back then, I struggled in class, sitting at the bottom of the ranks. Our homeroom teacher once told me that no matter what, I could never get into a good university. Oliver stood up for me, telling the teacher, "Whether she gets in or not isn't up to you." It's really disappointing for a teacher to speak like that. Later, he lent me his notes. Whenever I had questions, he was always eager to help. But I knew he was just a good person. I had never overlooked the way he looked at Ruby in her blue pleated skirt with such admiration. I was afraid to show my feelings to Oliver. I feared that we wouldn't even be able to be friends in the end. Until one day, when their relationship was caught by our homeroom teacher, who even called their parents in. Since both of them had good grades, they only got a scolding. Everyone in the class began to speculate about who leaked the secret until a boy highlighted on my notebook the phrase "You must not like Oliver." The notebook was thick, and every few pages had similar lines like "You must never like Oliver." "I must not fall for him." Those obscure and anxious phrases were written in colorless ink. When I entered the classroom, I heard that boy reading them out loud, his voice emphasizing every word, layer upon layer stripping away my self-esteem. Everyone was looking at me, and Ruby stood up, wanting to question me. Oliver stopped her and took the notebook, placing it on the desk without ever looking at me. In an instant, everyone in the class began to distance themselves from me, and I never sought out Oliver again. Until one afternoon, when a few people were talking about the incident, I heard Oliver stand up and say, "Don't spread rumors about things without evidence." That was in the past. My situation started to improve, and I wanted to explain to him, but there was no opportunity. I wrote him a note saying, "It wasn't me." He replied, "Don't do this in the future." At that moment, my hands were trembling. I didn't know how to respond, but at least he defended me in front of others. Yet, he truly believed that I did it. On the day after the college entrance exam, we met under the big banyan tree at school. I tried to explain, "Oliver, I didn't do that." I was struggling to call his name, as if saying it would be awkward. He smiled at me and said, "It's all in the past." I stood there, unable to muster even a trace of a smile. Suddenly, he patted my shoulder and said, "Diana, keep it up." "Goodbye, Diana." A gust of wind blew, scattering the banyan flowers all around. I watched his figure gradually fade away and silently murmured, "Goodbye, Oliver." I thought I wouldn't see him again. Later, I learned about his various achievements from classmates and group chats. He climbed one peak after another, shining brightly at the top. I worked hard to get into a 211 university, living a normal life where even obtaining a scholarship required immense effort. I had long known we were different people. When I found out he broke up with Ruby, I was quite shocked. I had intended to forget it completely, but I ultimately couldn't resist logging into that long-forgotten account. The first message inside was still an anonymous message between us.in our sophomore year. Oliver had a car accident and broke his leg. Many said he wouldn't be able to keep his first place title, and I felt uneasy hearing that. I organized my class notes, writing them out neatly in regular script, even though I usually wrote hurriedly. I was afraid he wouldn't be able to read my handwriting, so I specifically imitated a neat style and sent them to him daily. He initially thanked me and later kept guessing who I was. I avoided the question. I didn't want him to find out. A week after he broke up, I thought I'd send him one last message of comfort. Keep climbing those peaks, you'll meet that person at the top again. He asked, "Who are you?" I replied, "It doesn't matter, it's all in the past." After that, I never logged into that account again. Later, after graduation, I worked as a sales manager at a cosmetics company. Due to my mom's pressure to marry, I saw him again. He didn't seem as spirited as before. We sat in a cafe, awkwardly exchanging pleasantries and catching up on the years that had passed. I knew a little about his life, but he seemed unaware of mine. Regarding my life, I feel it's quite unremarkable. I don't know how to express these years without any highlights or brilliance. It seems rather dull. I briefly mentioned where I graduated and where I work. He listened with little interest, until I brought up the past again. I still wanted to explain that I would never do something like that. He froze for a moment, a hint of unshakable sadness in his eyes. He said, "It's been so long, let's not bring it up." I nodded softly, picked up my coffee, and took a sip. It tasted bitter. I suddenly remembered that I forgot to add sugar. For our second meeting, we arranged to go to a restaurant. I roughly remembered his preferences and ordered a table full of dishes. He arrived about 20 minutes late, saying he was stuck in traffic. I smiled and said nothing. He looked at the food on the table, surprised. He said, "These are all my favorites." "Really?" "I just ordered randomly," I replied. He enjoyed that meal a lot. After dinner, we took a walk out. On the way home, he suddenly held my hand and said, "Diana, should we give it a try?" I looked at him in surprise and then nodded. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I was actually with Oliver. When my mom asked how it was going, I didn't hide anything from her. I just lowered my head and said, "We're giving it a try." "What do you mean, try? Where are you going to find someone as good as Oliver?" "You'd better grab him," she said, exasperated. During our third meeting, Oliver directly asked if I wanted to get married. I knew his mom was pushing him like crazy. I really wanted to ask, "Do you really like me? Is it because you like or love me that you want to be with me?" But as the words were on the tip of my tongue, I couldn't bring myself to ask, looking into his eyes. I hadn't met anyone suitable in these years. Everyone around me was getting married. I was already 26, I wasn't a child anymore. So why should I ask these questions? At least Oliver was someone I liked. When it came time to get married, my mom asked for a dowry of $300,000. I was completely stunned. She had never mentioned it before, and I had never even thought of it. Without hesitation, Oliver transferred the money right then and there. At that moment, I felt I couldn't face him. Fortunately, after all these years of working, I had saved about $200,000 myself. I gave him my card and promised to pay him back within 2 years. He didn't take the card and simply said, "What's due should be given." On our wedding night, he was very drunk, staring at me and then gently touching my face, saying, "Diana, I didn't expect we'd get married." It wasn't a very fulfilling wedding night. I felt nothing but pain. At the end, he looked at me in surprise and asked, "Diana, have you never been in a relationship before?" I turned my head away, unable to look at him. The pain was too much. This was completely different from what I had read in novels. I went to the bathroom and opened that account, where I saw an anonymous post. I didn't expect marriage to turn into a business deal. I felt my legs weaken. He really thought that way. I didn't even have the courage to confront him, and tears threatened to fall uncontrollably. I could only wash my face repeatedly, and when I went out, he was probably a bit tired and had fallen asleep. I went to the study, and as I closed the door, the tears could no longer be held back. Maybe it was because of age or because everyone had to go through this phase. My mom and Oliver's mom were both pressuring us to have children. One day, when we went to Oliver's old house for dinner, his mom couldn't hold back anymore. She served me fish soup and said, "Diana, look how thin you are. You should eat more. How else are you going to have a baby?" This was the first time she had talked so directly about this topic. I didn't reply, just lowered my head to drink the soup. She suddenly changed the subject. "When are you two planning to have kids?" I felt a bit restless, thinking about how to respond when Oliver came over and said, "Mom, we're not in a hurry." He didn't seem very eager to have children with me. So why did we even get married? Just to live together? I often like to escape from such matters, not wanting to think about it. Anyway, I had just successfully run for manager, and my boss encouraged me to keep going. I quickly saved up 100,000, and combined with the previous 200,000, I recalled that anonymous post, thinking about it constantly. When I gave the card to Oliver, the situation was different from what I had imagined. His expression turned unexpectedly dark. "It's hard for you to save this much, I don't need it. You should spend it yourself." After saying that, he didn't bother to talk to me and just walked away. Not long after, he transferred a valuable property in the city center into my name. Then we were constantly at odds with each other until our third anniversary. I wanted to ease the tension in our relationship and invited him to celebrate our anniversary together, but he stood me up. Later, I saw him trending online. That night, I sat on the sofa, turned on a lamp, and thought about how I had never questioned him like this before. But this time, I remembered the countless cold dishes we had shared, just like my repeatedly frozen heart. He walked in, bringing a gust of cold air. I instinctively shrank back. He picked up a blanket from the sofa and draped it over my shoulders, saying, "Why aren't you sleeping yet?" I wanted to ask him, but before I could, he spoke first. "It's not like what's said online." On my way here, I ran into a drunk Ruby. I suddenly couldn't listen anymore and interrupted, saying, "It's fine. I'm a bit tired." I then stood up and walked towards the bedroom. He suddenly said from behind, "Why do you care about these things? Just go for what you want. When it rains, it pours." The spokesperson our company hired happened to be Ruby. I was responsible for receiving her, and she pointed at my name, saying, "Miss Diana, could you help me take off my shoes?" So, in front of everyone, I squatted down to help her with her shoes. She leaned in and whispered, "Do you really think you deserve him?" I looked up at her arrogant expression and felt a surge of frustration. I mouthed back, "That's none of your business." Outside, many reporters were waiting to interview her. Oliver texted me, saying he would pick me up after work. His message gave me a little confidence in my otherwise shaky marriage. Then someone recognized him, and those reporters were about to rush in. Oliver quickly ran away, and Ruby reached out to grab his sleeve as they ran together. Flashes from cameras flickered everywhere, dazzling my eyes. I touched my face and found a tear had fallen without me noticing. People around me exclaimed, "How romantic. A celebrity's love escape." Just like many years ago when their love story began, as the protagonists, we bystanders sighed, "What a perfect match. A romance between two top students." But this time, it seemed I wasn't just an ordinary bystander. I was the malicious supporting character who had disrupted the protagonist's beautiful love story. I felt a bit dazed and was knocked to the ground by someone. Someone stepped on my wrist, sending a sharp pain through me, yet I didn't even have the strength to cry out. As the crowd dispersed, a colleague asked, a little bewildered, "Diana, is that your husband?" At that moment, everyone around turned to look at me. My heart felt heavy, and I tried to calm my emotions, forcing a smile as I replied, "How is that possible? You must be mistaken." I managed to get through the afternoon at work like a zombie and stumbled home. I wandered aimlessly around the neighborhood, too cowardly to approach him. I really didn't know how to face him. What should I ask? Why did he leave me there today and run off with Ruby in a grand escape? As I walked, the sky darkened, and streetlights flickered on one by one. At that moment, Oliver suddenly appeared in front of me. I instinctively turned to run, but he said irritably, "Stop." Ignoring him, I quickened my pace. He swiftly caught up to me and grabbed my hand, causing me to cry out in pain. Noticing the swelling on my wrist in the dim light, he looked increasingly distressed. I felt frustrated since I hadn't had a chance to treat it. And I was annoyed with myself for not taking better care of my body, especially since I had work the next day. Oliver's face grew darker. What happened? When did this happen? I looked at him with sarcasm and said, "How can you even see me?" He was momentarily taken aback but didn't get angry. Instead, he suddenly picked me up. I used my good hand to hit his shoulder, asking him to put me down, fearing that colleagues from the neighborhood might see us. But he ignored me, carrying me to the parking lot and stuffing me into the passenger seat of his car. After buckling my seatbelt, he drove me to the hospital. While driving, he held the steering wheel and spoke without looking at me. That time on hot search was because Ruby was drunk and alone. I was worried she might get into trouble, so I took her home. This time, a reporter recognized me, and I ran away by myself. And she followed. He seemed calm, but his hands trembled slightly. And he had beads of sweat on his forehead despite the winter chill. She was drunk. Couldn't you contact anyone else? If not, you could have called the police. A reporter recognized you, and you had to run with her. What is your relationship with her? Oliver, can't you speak up? Why didn't you clarify? Don't you think I deserve an explanation? He suddenly stopped the car at the curb and turned to look at me in shock. I avoided his gaze, unable to hold back the tears, and opened the window to wipe them away. A hand reached over, attempting to hold mine. But I quickly pulled back. "I'm sorry," Oliver suddenly said. I remained silent. And he continued, "I'm sorry. I promise this won't happen again. And I won't let you suffer anymore." I still didn't respond, and he had no choice but to keep driving. Soon we arrived at the hospital. He busied himself running around. My wrist was swollen and had even broken skin. And since I was feeling a bit feverish, the doctor suggested I get in for, which would take about 1 to 2 hours. After a while, Oliver told me he needed to step out. When he returned, he brought me hot porridge. I reached out to take it, and he laughed. "Can you eat with one hand? Do you think your husband is dead?" It was awkward finishing that meal. And on the way back, when I opened the car door, I found a huge bouquet of red roses inside. He looked a bit anxious and said, "We got married a bit hastily. There are many things couples should experience together. Diana, do you want to continue exploring those things with me?" When I got home, I found the table set with cold dishes. I started to realize he was trying to make amends for our relationship. Many married friends told me that marriage requires maintenance and communication. My mom said Oliver was busy with his career and I needed to understand him better. I thought maybe we were still in the adjustment phase and we should speak openly about everything. I genuinely believed these things. We began doing all the things couples do, going to movies during breaks, and I would lean against him, his hands tightly holding mine. I gazed at his familiar profile and couldn't help but recall the past when I would only dare to glance at him from afar. However, this blissful time didn't last long. He began getting busier and busier. Sometimes when he came home, I could smell the disinfectant from the hospital on him. When I asked where he had been, he seemed a bit uncomfortable and replied, "Visiting sick employees." I started to doubt him, but then I wondered if I was just being overly suspicious. Could one even cheat at the hospital? My mom, noticing our relationship improving, pushed for us to have children more frequently and even asked if it was my problem, suggesting I should get checked. I angrily retorted, "Why don't you wonder if Oliver is the one with the problem?" Oliver's mother also began saying, "You're still young and it's good to have kids at this age. I can help take care of them." I felt helpless as to why they were all asking me about this while Oliver seemed detached from it all. It was as if having a baby was solely my responsibility. I had been promoted to manager for a while now, and with the position of marketing vice president opening up, I thought about competing for it. My mom said, "Can you really compare your earnings to Oliver's?" The vice president's salary was over $350,000 a year, and this was money I had earned myself. Since marrying Oliver, I had never asked him for money, but once I got pregnant and had children, I knew I wouldn't have that opportunity anymore. One evening, Oliver came to pick me up after work. We took a walk in the park next to the neighborhood where a few children were playing. One little girl fell, and I went to help her. In that brief moment, Oliver and I locked eyes. We were both adults, and the atmosphere had reached a boiling point. Suddenly, he hugged me tightly. I thought he was going to discuss having children, and I was contemplating whether I should sacrifice my career to agree. Then he said, "Diana, let's not have kids for now." In that instant, my heart sank completely. It was utterly ridiculous. The idea of self-sacrifice was laughably absurd. But fate loves to play tricks on people. I found out I was pregnant. When I received the news, I sat on a bench in the hospital, unable to speak or know who to tell. I touched my face and found a tear had fallen. I had considered the idea of terminating the pregnancy and thought about whether I should tell Oliver. I imagined that this child wouldn't exist in this world for long. I tried to eat something good, but as I did, I couldn't help but cry. She had just come into my womb, yet all I wanted was to end her life. For some reason, as I grew older, I felt increasingly lonely. I didn't understand how it had come to this. I had no answers. Oliver was coming home late every night for many days. I wanted to discuss this issue with him, but each time, I had already fallen asleep by the time he returned, and when I woke up, he had already left for work. He seemed extraordinarily busy. Then, one weekend, his mother urged us to return to the old house for dinner. The old house was in a villa halfway up the mountain. I cautiously broached the topic of children, but after just a sentence or two, he suddenly exploded. "Diana, isn't this life good enough for us? Do you know how complicated raising a child is? What if the child gets sick? Can you handle that?" His outburst stunned me into silence. Outside, it began to pour heavily. His phone lit up several times, and someone was calling. I caught a glimpse of the name Ruby, and the blood in my veins felt like ice. He saw my reaction and quickly said, "No. It's not like that. Diana." I wanted to question him, but no words came out, and tears streamed down my face. Then the phone rang again, the calls coming in incessantly, followed by WeChat messages. Oliver opened one, and a child's voice came through. "Uncle Oliver, it hurts. It hurts. I want to see you." Then came another voice message, "Oliver. What should I do? The baby is in critical condition. I want to see you one last time." I felt a chill run through my body. Did Oliver have a child with Ruby? But it wasn't what I thought. Oliver explained that Ruby had a love child she had been afraid to reveal to the media, and the child was suffering from leukemia, a terrible situation. It suddenly clicked for me. It wasn't that he didn't like kids or didn't want children, he just didn't want my child. Then he spoke to me in a pleading tone, "Diana. This is really the last time." With the rain pouring outside, I finally found my voice and said, "You want me to get out of the car now, right?" I reached for my seatbelt and unbuckled it, opening the car door. Oliver quickly grabbed my hand, and I coldly mocked, "Where have I stopped you, Diana? Can you stop being petty with a child?" "I've really moved on from Ruby," he said, stepping out of the car first. He opened the trunk, grabbed a large umbrella, and handed it to me. I didn't take it, and he forced my hand open to hold the umbrella, saying, "Diana, stop throwing a tantrum. That child is really in serious trouble." After that, he draped his coat over my shoulders and drove away quickly. I tossed his coat aside, held the umbrella, and felt a sharp pain in my abdomen. The rain fell so heavily that even such a large umbrella offered little protection. It was difficult to catch a cab on the winding mountain road. I tentatively moved forward, and the pain in my stomach intensified. Then suddenly, my foot slipped. I tightly embraced my belly, but it was of little use. The rain blurred my vision, but I still saw red blood mixing with the rain beneath me. In that torrential downpour, I struggled to call for help. I reached for my phone. I needed to get someone here. Suddenly, I heard a voice, "Damn. Diana. What happened to you?" I struggled to open my eyes and saw my boss's son, Julian, who I had never gotten along with. But this time, I didn't care about anything else. I clutched his pant leg tightly and pleaded, "Please take me to the hospital. My child." He quickly knelt down, scooped me up, and rushed me to his car. On the way, he wrapped me in a blanket, his voice stammering, "It's going to be okay. I drive really fast. Diana, hang in there. If something happens to you, all the clients you worked so hard to gain will end up with me. And the little girl in your team won't escape my grasp either." He kept babbling. When we reached the hospital, I was quickly taken into the emergency room. After receiving anesthesia, I fell asleep within seconds. When I woke up, I wanted to ask the doctor about the child's condition. The doctor looked somewhat angry and said, "In this heavy rain, you fell so hard, what do you think would happen to your body?" She wanted to continue, but upon seeing my tear-streaked face, she finally sighed in resignation, "It's okay, you'll have children in the future." After the doctor left, I lay in bed, repeatedly telling myself, "It's nothing. Even if that child was born into such a family, she wouldn't be happy." Yet I couldn't help but feel miserable. I hadn't protected my child, and I had degraded myself. Why did I marry Oliver, when he had just said not long ago that we would live well and he wouldn't let me suffer anymore? But as soon as Ruby entered the picture, all his promises went out the window. Julian asked me for Oliver's number so he could call and inform him. I tried my best to smile and respond, but I could only manage a bitter smile, saying, "Thank you, but there's nothing wrong with me. You can go back to what you were doing. I'll be back at the company soon. I won't compete with you for the East China market share this time." Julian rolled his eyes at me and said, "Are you in love or something? Getting all sentimental? Let me tell you, you must tell your husband about this. You've suffered so much." "Well, I understand. After all, you're older, and you have little dating experience. You rushed into marriage, and I couldn't stop you back then, but this time you really have to listen to me." He suddenly sat down, taking my hand seriously. If it weren't for the fact that he really helped me, I wouldn't be able to control myself and would argue with him. His words were always sharp. I still remember when I told my colleagues I was getting married. He stopped me after work and asked if I had never seen a man before, questioning why I was getting married so soon after just a few blind dates. I patiently told him it was someone I had liked for a long time. He continued sarcastically, "How long have you liked him? Have you even interacted with him? Do you know him? You're not seriously going to play the little girl card at your age, are you?" His barrage of questions nearly made my blood boil. I shot back, "What's it to you?" He fell silent after that, but I didn't even want the wedding gift he gave me. He tossed it into my cabinet, and when I returned it once, he threw it back at me, which I ignored. Now that he saw me in such a disheveled state, he had even more material to mock me with in the future. Noticing my silence, Julian continued, "You can't be serious. With you acting like this, your husband won't feel sorry for you." "The one who threw me aside is him," I replied calmly. "Huh? Are you hungry? I'll go buy you something," he said awkwardly, unsure of what else to say, and used that as an excuse to leave. Not long after, I received a call from Oliver. After hanging up, he called again. After rejecting several calls, he finally stopped calling. I leaned against the headboard and tried to clear my mind. Soon, my phone rang with a strange local number. As someone in sales, I couldn't afford to miss any client calls, so I composed myself and answered the phone. Then came the last voice I wanted to hear, "Diana. What are you doing? Why are you dragging innocent people into this? I said it would be the last time, why are you so vengeful?" This was the first time I had seen him so angry. I listened in silence as he continued, "Do you know how much this hurts the child?" I couldn't take it anymore and interrupted, "Let's get a divorce." I'll be at the Civil Affairs Bureau on Monday. After saying that, I hung up. Then I saw a Weibo notification pop up on my phone. Explosion. Ruby's child. I knew he must think it was me. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days. And the first thing I did after being discharged was to look for a rental apartment. I couldn't stay with my mom for now because she definitely wouldn't approve of my divorce from Oliver. I was exhausted and had no strength left to convince her. After renting the apartment, I went back to the house I shared with Oliver to collect my things. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Oliver sitting on the couch. When he saw me, he quickly got up and asked, "Where have you been these days? You didn't answer any of my calls." "I'm here to get my things. Don't be late on Monday." I ignored him and went to the bedroom to pack. He followed me, saying, "Diana, you're an adult. Is divorce something you can just casually bring up?" I turned to look at him and suddenly realized he seemed different from how I remembered him over the years. My affection had given him an aura, but he was just an ordinary man, a foolish ordinary man. His brilliance and his peak couldn't bring me anything. This kind of affection was just too exhausting. I didn't want to keep looking up to others. I said calmly, "Yes. We're both adults, and I don't want to make this ugly. I'm serious." He fell silent, then suddenly said, "Don't regret this." On Saturday, I moved into my rented apartment. I was so tired these days, and my stomach hurt from all the running around. Just as I lay down, Julian called, asking me to open the door. When I opened it, he was right there. I was so exhausted that I said, "Julian, this is my personal time." He kicked the door open and brought in a bunch of bags. "Diana, I was in Guangdong for a while. Do you want to try the soup I made?" He completely ignored what I said and walked right in. I glared at him, my expression grim, and he set down his things, looking me over. TSK. Diana, look at your face. If someone didn't know better, they'd think you didn't have much time left. You look as pale as a ghost." My gaze fell on my reflection in the floor-length mirror in the living room. Julian's words were cruel, but they hit home. I really did look like I was running out of time. Thinking this made my stomach hurt even more. I didn't bother with him and went to lie down in the bedroom. He could do whatever he wanted. He ended up staying, having dinner with me and cleaning up the kitchen before leaving. I asked him who had given him my address. He replied casually, "Do I really need to ask someone to find out something?" His pretense was just his usual style. But I did appreciate him during this time. I didn't know how to repay him, feeling like I had a carefree attitude toward my debts. On Saturday night, my phone suddenly exploded with calls. As soon as I answered, I was bombarded with insults. My friends' phones couldn't even get through. A torrent of intolerable derogatory messages came pouring in. I had slept through the afternoon and felt groggy, finally piecing together what had happened. Someone online had exposed that I reported Oliver and Ruby out of jealousy back in high school. And Ruby's fans were now massively retweeting that I was the scheming B*TCH who exposed her love child just to steal Oliver away. They had concocted a story that Ruby's child was Oliver's and that I was the biggest schemer who had ruined their passionate romance. Even some classmates who used to get along with Ruby came out to testify. They said that I had been ugly and mediocre back then, and my unrequited love for Oliver had turned into a vengeful scheme. Before long, my backup phone rang. It was my mom calling to ask what was going on, saying someone had thrown rocks at her window. My mom and dad had divorced, and over the years, my dad had rarely contacted me, so he wasn't affected by this mess. I reassured my mom not to be afraid. Julian's call came right after. He knew my backup number. He said the public pressure was forcing the company to fire me and urged me not to leave the house because he was coming to see me. I quickly stopped him, knowing there were definitely people downstairs. After all, there were people going to my mom's place to cause trouble. Any man coming to see me would be painted in a bad light. First, I found the photo of our marriage certificate I had taken and sent it to Julian. I told him that if the company wanted to fire me, there was nothing I could do, but I needed a little media power. I needed to speak out now. Julian replied, Those idiots think they can just order me around? I'll have the official account send you that photo. Then I sent out a statement myself, asking various media outlets to help share it. I stated that Mr. Oliver and I had been married for 3.5 years. If the child was his, that was evidence of his infidelity, and I was currently negotiating a divorce with him. Additionally, we were set up through blind dates, and if he had told me that his love was so hard to forget, I would never have interacted with him. As a well-established skincare company, we didn't have a lot of media resources. But I bet someone would help me. I hadn't even been involved in Ruby's situation. There were plenty of people in that world who wanted to bring her down. In less than half an hour, my statement went viral. Finally, Oliver called. He sounded extremely angry. Diana, why are you in such a hurry? Do you know how hard it has been for Ruby to get this far? My stomach was aching from the stress of the divorce, and I had a heating pad on my abdomen. I had the recording on, capturing how he defended Ruby. Once I felt I had enough, I couldn't listen anymore. I calmly said, Oliver, I have just one request, don't be late on Monday. After that, I hung up. I put on my coat and prepared to go find my mom. After all, she was getting old and couldn't handle all this. But as soon as I stepped outside, I saw a shadow sneaking around, which scared me enough to scream. The person quickly covered my mouth, saying, It's me, Diana. My mom pushed me into the house, removed her scarf and hat, and asked, Are you okay? Did they bully you? Her eyes were red, and her hair was messy, but the worry in her eyes made me tear up instantly. I had always been afraid to tell her, worried she'd scold me and think Oliver was so great that she'd chastise me for not being clear-headed about wanting a divorce. Yet here she was, crossing half the city in the middle of the night to find me. She held my hand, looking even more concerned. What happened? Why are your hands so cold? Have you eaten? Are you sick? Mom's here. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I fell into her arms and cried, Mom, I lost my baby. I lost my baby. She was first shocked, then started patting my back, saying, Mom's here. It's my fault. I didn't provide good conditions for you, and you got bullied. My mom stayed with me in the bedroom to rest. She made me some hot soup, and after I drank it, I fell into a deep sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I vaguely heard noise coming from the living room. Oliver, is this revenge for the $300,000 I asked for? I can return the money. Can you clarify things for Diana? Oliver, Diana hasn't had a good life, being raised by a mom like me. Can you have some compassion and treat her better? Oliver hadn't spoken yet, but I could hear my mom continuing, changing her approach this time. Oliver, what does it matter if your family is wealthy and powerful? Let me tell you, I'll do whatever it takes to protect my child. I'll sit downstairs at your company every day. I'll die at your company's door if I have to. I don't believe it won't affect you. I stood at the door, tears streaming down my face. Julian suddenly messaged me, asking if I wanted to go big. The company decided to terminate Ruby's contract and asked if I dared to gamble on becoming a spokesperson. As someone in marketing, I naturally understood his meaning. I had initially planned to part ways amicably, but if that was the case, I would make it a stepping stone for myself. I might not be able to break into the entertainment industry, but I wanted to make my life as good as possible. I still had my high school homeroom teacher's WeChat. She had added me voluntarily after graduation. After marrying Oliver, I had sought out my homeroom teacher to prove something to him. I asked her if I was the one who reported Oliver and Ruby to her. She replied, Of course not, that happened so long ago. I saw them hugging together myself. I hadn't deleted our chat records. Today, my homeroom teacher messaged me to ask what was going on. I hadn't had the chance to reply when I decided to tell her directly, I want to prove myself and hope you can help me testify about that message. She replied that she was just an ordinary person and didn't want to get involved. I took a screenshot of our conversation and sent it to her, saying, either you post this, or I'll share all our messages. If our chat messages went public, she would be affected. The reason I was threatening her to post was that sometimes an outsider's words could carry more weight than those of the involved parties. I needed to create a sense of atmosphere around this event. Quickly, I opened my computer and began to write a short essay. I had always excelled in language arts, and I wrote a colorful piece about unrequited love. I firmly denied reporting them and concluded with a sentence: I had always looked at the stars in the distance but forgot that I could also become a star. I diligently worked in my industry. Did my partner's scandal mean I should lose my job? Why should I? The company reposted that statement, saying, "Perfect makeup was created for every ordinary girl who shines in her own way." A normal married female employee will never be fired just because her husband and the spokesperson are involved in rumors. She is the victim. She has been with our company for 6 years, creating countless values for us. We believe she is the shining woman and now invite her to be our spokesperson. Next, the video statement from my homeroom teacher went viral. Then many colleagues testified that Oliver had come to the company to pick me up. By the time everything was settled, it was very late. I turned off my phone and went to sleep. As soon as I woke up in the morning, I saw that my mom had prepared a table full of nutritious meals. She came in with a sweet tone, asking, "Did Diana wake you up?" I hugged her and whispered, "It's okay. I've handled everything." The next morning, Oliver unexpectedly waited for me downstairs. He brought flowers and a set of gemstone necklaces. He looked worn out, with red circles under his eyes, and said, "Diana, I've got it all cleared up. The one who sent out the child's photo was Ruby's side, not you. What happened in high school was a long time ago. I really don't care. But I care, Oliver. Have you ever been isolated by a group of people, with them discussing how shameless you are and how unworthy you are of anyone? Yet I have to thank your indifference. It has made my situation a little better. But I'm really tired. Let's just let each other go." I didn't want to drag this out any longer. But he stubbornly continued, "Diana, Ruby's child is fine now. We can live our own lives in peace from now on." I had learned not to get angry over such things anymore. I just calmly looked at him and said, "Her child is fine, but mine is gone." He looked at me in shock. I moved closer to him, staring into his eyes and said, "Oliver, you killed her. You killed her. How can we be together after that?" He reached out to hug me, but I pushed him away and looked at him coldly. "Diana, don't look at me like that, don't look at me like that." As he spoke, he began to cry. I sent him the recording of what he had said, saying, "Do you want to listen to what you said? Are you going insane now? I really don't want this to turn ugly." He kept saying, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Just this last time, I really won't do it again." I was just feeling pity for her. I thought that child was pitiful without a dad. I was tired of his so-called explanations and threatened him, saying, "Let's get a divorce. If you keep pestering me, I'll post this recording online." He looked at me with a despondent smile and said, "Will posting it make you not angry?" Then he opened his own account and posted it right in front of me. He had completely lost it. I didn't want to keep entangling with him anymore, so I just threw out, "Then I'll have to go through legal procedures." He stood downstairs, refusing to leave, even when a heavy rain started in the afternoon. He texted me, "Diana, you felt miserable in the rain that day too, right? I'll help you punish that damned man." I felt nothing. I was looking for a lawyer to prepare for the divorce. The online situation escalated with wave after wave of events. Oliver's actions drew a lot of backlash from people, including Ruby's fans and many bystanders. He received many attack messages just like I did at the beginning. Every time I saw him, he looked more haggard than before. Even his mom came to find me, begging me to help Oliver. But I wouldn't be soft-hearted anymore. No one felt sorry for me back then. I even knew that as long as Oliver needed it, he could always hire a professional PR team. There was no need for me, an amateur. The only reason I could counterattack was that I caught them off guard. I just wanted to end my relationship with him as soon as possible, but Oliver kept bothering me. He found my old notebook, the one I had brought back when we got married. He held it and pleaded, "Please like me again, Diana. Just like me one more time." Please don't leave me. In front of him, I threw that notebook into the artificial lake, but without hesitation, he jumped in after it. Soaked and messy, he retrieved that old, battered notebook, which contained the regrets of my youth. After getting wet, it was even harder to read. He looked at me, his eyes full of pleading. I softly said, either we get a divorce now, or we can drag it out a bit longer, but we'll still end up divorced. You said that once I reach the peak, I would meet that person. I've tried my best to reach the peak, why don't you want me anymore? He suddenly said. I didn't respond. But then he suddenly became emotional, with a glimmer of light in his eyes, and exclaimed, It's you, right? It's you, right? You're the anonymous one, aren't you? You can't leave me. Diana, it's you who made me unable to let go, now you want to throw me away. Why are you always like this? You never speak up, he said, angrily pounding on the handrail. Even if I'm not the anonymous one, as your wife before, do you think your actions towards me were ethical? You said our marriage was just a transaction. He couldn't lift his head after my first statement, but then he suddenly looked up at me and asked, when did I say that? When did I ever say that? Forget it. It doesn't matter anymore. Every time I see you, I remember how you trampled on me. Every time I see you, I think of my child. I couldn't hold it in any longer and cried out, tears streaming down my face. He cautiously looked at me and asked, Do you really hate me this much now? Fine. But you can't refuse my property gift. After signing, I returned home, feeling utterly drained. These years felt like a dream. After my divorce, my mom couldn't tell if she was happy or sad. She secretly gave Oliver the bride price, but Oliver refused it. So she directly asked someone to help her exchange it for $300,000 in cash and placed it at Oliver's front desk. When she returned and saw my expression, she looked like she was about to cry. I've given it all to him. That's great. I praised her. She ignored me and went to the kitchen to cook. As she washed the vegetables, she mumbled, I knew how good Oliver's conditions were, but I was worried you two wouldn't last long. I thought if you were willing to marry him, I'd get you some security. Who knew it would come to this? I walked over and hugged her, saying, My life is still long. I can still earn a lot more than $300,000. As the heat from the internet faded, I took the endorsement fee from the company, and my daily work responsibilities remained. I was relatively satisfied with my life. Julian contacted me from time to time, and I felt a bit awkward. I didn't want to ruin my cherished job because of this. Until the company started gossiping, when a rude guy came up to me and said, Diana is divorced. Just divorced, and she can already get involved with Julian. I splashed the tea in my cup onto his face and said, Watch your mouth. He was completely enraged by my reaction and shouted, You don't think just because you're almost 30, you're still desirable, do you? This guy had pursued me when I first joined the company, but I hadn't accepted him. Now he was just trying to gross me out. I was about to hit him when Julian arrived. He shouted at Julian, Julian, you can't really be interested in a woman like Diana, can you? Julian punched him to the ground and said, I damn well like Diana. What does it have to do with you? Who are you to say anything? A stone stirred up 1,000 waves. I watched my precarious job situation, dodging Julian whenever I saw him in the company, until one business trip when Julian happened to be going too. I drove there, and for some reason, he didn't drive. On another rainy day, I was holding an umbrella as I went downstairs and saw Oliver cautiously approaching, saying, Diana, I just happened to be passing by. Can I give you a ride home? I waved my car keys at him, and Julian was standing at the door, already getting some rain on him. Julian, aren't you leaving yet? Julian quickly followed me, grabbing the strap of my trench coat. On the way, I drove while he said to himself, I never expected I'd be reduced to being the one to provoke your ex-husband. Before I could respond, he continued, Forget it. At least I still have some use for you. You can come to me whenever you want. I was like, what the heck? What kind of nonsense is this? What was going on in his head? I helplessly explained, I've already moved on from him. Then why did you ask me to get in the car? Am I supposed to just watch you get drenched in the rain? I retorted. Julian laughed like a blooming morning glory and said, "You finally know to feel sorry for me." Diana. Extra, Oliver. After I broke up with Ruby, I spent a long time doubting myself. Why? What was wrong with me that Ruby would give up on me? Until that time when I had to deal with countless blind dates arranged by my mom and met her. At first, she was looking down, sipping her coffee, not even glancing at me. It wasn't until I spoke that she looked up, and that moment's gaze made my heart race. I recognized her. The girl who barely spoke in class back then. I even remembered she seemed to like me, even going so far as to do something against her principles. To meet again in such circumstances was surprising. After the blind date, we exchanged contact information and went our separate ways. That night, lying in bed, I suddenly thought that if I had to choose someone to accompany me in life, I wanted someone who liked me. On our second date, I clearly remember when I held her hand, it was slightly trembling, and her palms were sweaty despite it being winter. She ordered a table full of dishes I liked, and she didn't get angry when I was late. She blushed and said it was just a coincidence, but I wasn't the high school boy I used to be. I knew very well whether it was a coincidence or if she had put thought into it. While we were taking a walk at night, I looked down and saw her gazing at me. Without thinking, I said, "How about we get married?" I was shocked that the words had escaped my mouth and felt it was very presumptuous, but I didn't expect her to agree. She seemed easily satisfied. I remembered once when I booked an entire hotel floor filled with flowers Ruby liked to propose to her, and all she did was hug me and say, "Oliver, I want to pursue my dreams." People seem to change so easily. Ruby once said if her future didn't include me, she didn't want that future. The 3 years I spent with Diana were the easiest years of my life. No matter how late I came home, she would always be on the couch waiting for me with her computer, a warm orange lamp lit in the living room, her hair half-tied, looking so gentle it was unreal. She always remembered what I liked and paid attention to everything about me. But sometimes I would get angry at her for being too cautious. I'll never forget the night we got married when she gave me her savings, saying it was to repay the bride price. That day, I was really angry. Do we really have to keep such a strict account of everything between us? I had considered having a child with her until I ran into Ruby again. That day, I was supposed to go celebrate my 3rd anniversary with Diana, but I saw a drunk Ruby on the side of the road, all alone. I thought about ignoring her, but after knowing her for so many years, I knew how much she cared about her career, so I softened. I saw that child, Ruby's illegitimate son, and the child's father was a powerful figure in their circle. I didn't want to know the details. The man had never shown up from the beginning. The child looked emaciated, and Ruby, who had once been so proud, now seemed so humble. Having a child carries significant risks, and I was terrified that something like that could happen to me and Diana. How could I accept it? I didn't want to think about it for a while, so whenever the topic of children came up, I was very resistant. When I returned home that day, it was late. I expected Diana to be angry with me, but she wasn't. I would have preferred her to yell at me or even hit me, like a normal wife would, rather than being so cautious. Later, I reflected on whether I hadn't given her enough security. I thought about picking her up from work. But then I ran into reporters waiting outside for Ruby. I didn't want to face them, I just wanted to run away, and by some twist of fate, I ended up with Ruby. I wanted to explain things to Diana, but she interrupted me, and at that moment, I felt a bit scared. That Julian from her company kept visiting her, and for the first time, I felt panic. Ruby's child rarely met strangers and often called me wanting to see me. Ruby even texted me one day saying she regretted her decision. Unexpectedly, I didn't feel any thrill. I now had Diana. But sometimes, seeing Ruby struggle made me feel a pang of sadness because those youthful years were always spent with her. Ruby wanted me to keep her child a secret, and I agreed. Until the last time I went to see that child, it was pouring rain. I had arranged for someone to pick up Diana because I feared I might miss seeing that poor child for the last time. But later, the person I sent told me they couldn't find Diana. Then I saw the news online, and at that moment, I was extremely angry. I had trusted her so much. I went to confront her, but her voice sounded weak. The next 2 days felt longer than my entire life. There were many online rumors about Diana, so I called Ruby to let her handle it. She asked me for half a day. Then not long after, Diana spoke out. When I saw her statement, a sense of infinite panic spread through me. I wanted to explain to her why I hadn't handled the situation right away, and we started arguing. For the first time, she brought up divorce. That was when I truly understood how completely unloving Diana had become. She didn't give me any time to react. At that moment, I was still thinking about saving our relationship. Then she told me that the day I left her on the road, she lost the baby. That was the first time I saw her cry so heartbreakingly. I really was scum. I chose to escape. I went back inside and saw that notebook. The words written in colorless ink were nearly unreadable. I shone a UV light on each page. All the sentences were short, but they contained the silent thoughts of Diana from those years. I immediately realized the anonymous person was her, so I went to find her, hoping we could have another chance. Then she threw the notebook into the water, and I clumsily went to retrieve it. The fading words felt like Diana's fading love for me. She said that every time she saw me, it only brought her pain. I had set her free by signing the divorce papers. She really was a fool. She had the recording in her hands but didn't release it. I sent it out, and soon I understood why she had been so reactive at that moment. Thousands of messages flooded in online, filled with slurs, all aimed at the silent her. I had never been one to attend class reunions, but suddenly I wanted to know what Diana had been like in the past. To my surprise, nobody had much of an impression of her. She didn't like to talk, always sat alone, resting her head on her desk doing problems. Then a male classmate suddenly mentioned that he had married through a blind date, feeling there was no love. He anonymously complained that it felt like a transaction, and his wife found out. Now they were fighting over a divorce, but he genuinely liked his wife. I quickly caught on to this information and asked about his wedding date. It turned out to be the same day as mine. I asked him if he had added Diana, and he said he couldn't remember but pulled out his phone to check, and sure enough, there she was. In that moment, I wanted him to help explain that the message Diana saw wasn't from me. But when I pulled out my phone and saw the red exclamation mark on the message I had sent to Diana, my heart sank completely. She didn't even want to be friends with me anymore. The last time we met was also on a rainy day. I wanted to take her home, but I had already lost that opportunity.